So I'm Jim McGrath. I am the gun violence prevention issue specialist for the Illinois League. Last year, we were online and we discussed gun violence prevention as a public health issue. But gun violence is a lot more than just gun control. And so these two presenters that we're going to hear talk today, we'll talk about some different aspects other than just controlling the guns, which we need to look at as far as controlling gun violence. So our first presenter is Maralea Negron, over on your far right. Maralea is the Director of Policy and Advocacy Research for the network. She will focus on domestic violence and gender-based violence. Her presentation will provide you with the background to understand why we are supporting a bill in Springfield called Karina's Bill. So remember that, Karina's Bill. You'll hear about that a lot. Our second presenter, Sara Knizhnik, is chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative in Lake County, and also the founder and CEO of a new gun violence prevention advocacy group called Safe Illinois. Her presentation will cover many areas of community violence interruption, which is a new aspect of gun violence where we're trying to get in front of the problem rather than solve it after it happens. So we'll get started. So Maralea, you're on.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Maralea Negron. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Policy, Advocacy, and Research at the Network Advocating Against Domestic Violence. I'm going to talk a little bit about what my organization is and what we do, but really we're a collaborative membership organization composed of direct service providers throughout the Cook and the Collier counties. So should I dive into my presentation now? Okay, great. So I'm here to talk to you all today about Karina's Bill. As Jim said, and really talk about the intersection of firearms and domestic violence and why this combination can be so deadly. And before I dive into the presentation, I do just want to take a moment to give a brief disclaimer that, the topics we're going to be covering today, the data, the statistics, they're all people. They're all individuals with their individual stories, their lived experiences. So even though some of this can be data heavy, I want you all to bear that in mind. Also, we're going to be talking a lot about domestic violence, power and control dynamics, kind of what that looks like, and how pervasive the issue really is amongst our society and our community. And so I would like us all to also be mindful of that. If you or a loved one have experienced any form of gender-based violence, please do what you need to do to, stay safe, take a moment and leave the room if you need to, because this can be a very heavy topic. So who is the Network Advocating Against Domestic Violence? We were established in 1980 to help establish best practices for domestic violence service providers, specifically in Chicago. We were formerly called the Chicago Metropolitan Battered Women's Network. And as I stated earlier, we're a collaborative membership-driven organization of direct service providers. Today, we're composed of over 40 direct service providers who not only provide domestic violence services, but also sexual violence, so rape crisis centers, and human sex trafficking providers as well. And we have gone through a rebrand. We're now known as the Network Advocating Against Domestic Violence. We're also administrators of the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline. I did leave some reusable bags outside on one of the tables. Feel free to grab those and take them with you, as well as handouts, not just on the bill that I'm here to discuss, but also on the intersection of domestic violence and firearms, as well as an overview of calls to the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline. So again, whatever is not taken from those handouts, I will be taking them back with me. So don't worry about, leaving paper. I will use it, and I will use it to talk to legislators in Springfield about the organization and kind of what we do. The hotline is confidential. It's available 24/7, 365 days a year. And there are over 240 languages available via live interpretation. And We offer text, chat, and calls. I just wanted to share a couple of our membership/providers in the next couple of slides. Some of you may be more familiar with these names. So I just wanted to share those. Mujeres Latinas en Acción, Legal Aid Chicago, which is a legal aid firm that takes clients from all over. Lifespan, Resilience, again, Ascend Justice, Metropolitan Family Services, Wings is a really big one. So as I mentioned before, we have over 40 membership providers. They all influence our policy and legislative priorities and the work that we do in the community. I also wanted to cover kind of key vocabulary for those of you that may be less familiar with the terms related to domestic violence, gender-based violence, and intimate partner violence. Gender-based violence is really the umbrella term that we use, and it's referring to violence based on power and control inequities. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later in the presentation, but it really can be a relationship between people of any gender that stems from harmful gender norms. And again, it's the umbrella term that kind of includes domestic violence and intimate partner violence. It can also refer to sexual violence and human sex trafficking, which is why it's such a broad umbrella term. The other terms that kind of fit within that original definition are domestic violence and intimate partner violence. And we do tend to use those rather interchangeably, but intimate partner violence is really the violence that we most are referring to at this intersection of firearms. And it explains, power and control dynamics within a relationship when we refer to intimate partner violence. Some more terms and definitions that I would like you all to be aware of as we go into this presentation. Survivor and victim, we let the survivor that's experienced harm or is experienced harm determine which term they'd like to lead with. We usually refer to the individual who has lived experience with either domestic violence or intimate partner violence as a survivor. But in this case, we're also going to be referring to them as a petitioner in an order of protection. And then the person causing harm or the perpetrator of violence is commonly referred to as the respondent in an order of protection. So, the survivor is getting that order of protection against the person that has caused harm or is causing harm. And then there are different types of orders some of you may be aware of. There's a stalking no contact order. There's also a civil no contact order. But the order that we're here to talk about today and what the bill focuses on is an order of protection. Orders of protection can be both civil and criminal. That's only for your brief edification. We're not going to get into the nuanced details about the differences between the orders, but I just want you all to know that we're talking about orders of protection. I'd also like to take a moment to talk about the pervasiveness and how common, intimate partner violence and domestic violence really are in our society. These data and figures are taken from the CDC, so the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. More than 1 in 3 women have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. So I really want that number to kind of sink in. I think that there's a lot of stigma talking about this issue, but really we know how common it really is and how pervasive it is in our society. 1 in 7 men have experienced some form of domestic violence in their lifetime. 1 in 3 teens will experience domestic violence before reaching adulthood. And Black women are almost 3 times more likely to experience murder by their intimate partner than members of other racial backgrounds. This power and control wheel is very common in the domestic violence community. We use it to talk about the tactics that people that cause harm use to stay in control and in power of the relationship and the situation. This power and control wheel was created in 1984, and there are a lot of iterations of it, but this is the original one. I'm not going to go into the nuanced details of every single tactic, but I will go through them briefly. The use of intimidation, so making someone scared, intimidated by you. Emotional abuse, Using isolation is also a common tactic. So not letting people see friends or family, their social networks, monitoring them, surveilling them, minimizing, denying, and blaming. So when someone does cause harm and there's been a big outburst of anger, they try to downplay it. That's another tactic. The use of children. So saying, I'm going to take the kids, I'm going to, file for divorce, you're never going to see them again is another one. The use of male privilege. So we know that while we talk about gender-based violence more and more as a gender issue that, all genders can really experience, we know that really the people that are most affected by this are women, and male privilege comes along with that. So saying, I'm the man of the house, I get to make the big decisions is also a tactic that has historically been commonly used. The use of economic abuse, so controlling the money, giving an allowance, those sorts of things. And then coercion and threats is also a common tactic. Again, what does domestic violence intimate partner look and sound like? So degrading a person, making dismissive comments, fighting, hitting, and yelling constantly, making someone question their memory or sanity, things like you're crazy, you're insane, I never said that, I never did that. Again, that's minimizing and blaming on that previous slide of power and control. Controlling what a person can do, who they can see, and where they can go. That is, again, the monitoring, the surveilling, the intimidation that comes along with those types of behaviors. Harassing and repeated unwanted communication. So nowadays, in the world of social media and cell phones, obviously this is a lot harder to control, but it is something that is, again, another tactic. And there are a ton of barriers to getting help and why individuals that are in these situations may not leave. And I just wanted to highlight a few of them. We talk a lot about isolation, and that is a big one, right? Isolating you from your support systems, from your friends, from your family. You have nowhere to go once, that person has really done what they sought out to do, which was control you and control who you're talking to. But really, language barriers is a big one, especially if you are a new arrival to this country, you don't speak the language, you don't have the support system. Stereotypes feed into this. Again, accessibility. If you have a disability and you find it harder to find accommodations, this can be accommodations in housing, and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of fear and, again, stigma that comes with this, especially with the LGBTQ community. If they're in a harmful relationship, they might be fearful of being outed as leverage over that person to leave the situation. Immigration status, again, and housing is consistently a really big one. The next section of the presentation, we're going to talk about kind of what we know about domestic violence, intimate partner violence through providing services. So as I said, a lot of the work that the network does is related not only to policy and legislative priorities, but my small but mighty team and I, we do a lot of data and research on this, and we publish an annual report that I'll get into a little bit later. And some of the slides, what we're going to cover today, is pulled from the annual data report that we do, looking at the services that are provided. So when someone seeks services with a provider, they will disclose the types of abuse that they are experiencing. So as I said earlier in the presentation, it's not always physical. And I think, since the passage of the Illinois Domestic Violence Act in 1986, that definition has really been expanded upon to not just be physical. It's, emotional, it's financial, it's mental. And so we know that 49% of individuals who sought services with a provider in 2022, 49% of those individuals said it was emotional abuse. 48% of those individuals said it was physical, and 3% said it was sexual. So you're not limited to describing the kinds of abuse that you are facing if you fit all the boxes, if you fit just one. But that's just, highlights of what we're seeing in terms of the services provided. And there were over 40,000 individuals served in 2022 alone. From the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline, when someone calls and is looking for either support services, trying to identify what it is that they're experiencing, again, multiple boxes can be checked if someone says that they're experiencing more than one type of abuse. But 53%, which was the most common, was emotional abuse. 41% was physical, 3% disclosed sexual, and 3% disclosed financial. In 2022, there were over 37,000 calls to the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline. We know just from the data that we're collecting and starting to analyze this year that that number has increased. And the number just continues to increase, the number of calls and also the number of individuals seeking services. Here's a QR code if you're interested in looking at our full data report from 2022. I will say that it was our first year doing the data report, so it is very long. This year we do plan on divvying it up into editions to focus on kind of a series. So the first one that we're anticipating launching is a look at the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline and our Survivor Fund. But really we try to, as much as, you know, it is really data and statistics heavy, we do include survivor stories. We talk to survivors. We include their lived experience in this, those that are seeking services or have sought services and are able to kind of give life and breath to the data and the statistics that we have. We also do program profiles. So if there's a service provider who has a really new or interesting type of program that they offer, we also do highlight that to kind of be innovative about the ways in which we try and support individuals who are in the process of leaving that situation or have left. A couple other statistics I kind of wanted to point out was that, and this is again all included in the report, in 2022, there were 106 domestic violence shooting incidents across Illinois. That resulted in 52 victim deaths, 67 victim injuries, 19 suspect deaths, and 10 suspect injuries. In 2022, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, in 2022, 45% of suspended and revoked FOID cards, so fire owner identification cards, were unaccounted for by Illinois State Police. And in January 2024 alone, there were 19 domestic violence firearm involved homicides in Illinois. So kind of just from the 1 month that we've been able to take a look back, we know that this number is a huge increase compared to 2023 of January last year. As I mentioned, you know, we are planning on serializing this data report. And so we're hoping to have our hotline edition published in April and our service provider edition expected in June. So I would encourage you, if this interests you, if it's a topic that you'd like to learn more about, just visit our website. And we do make all of our reports publicly available for public consumption. We're not trying to gatekeep any of this information. As we're talking about data, some of the more statistics that I like to highlight about this intersection of domestic violence and firearms: 75% of all women who were killed in domestic violence homicides are murdered after they leave or are in the process of leaving. So I really want that to sink in. I'm not going to go through every single one of these because I believe you're going to get a copy of this report as well. And I am also happy to provide kind of the backup of where we pull this data from. A lot of it is from the CDC, but we do have other sources that we pull this data from. But 75% of women who were killed in domestic violence homicides were killed when they were leaving, after they left, or when they were in the process of leaving. I just want to emphasize that one more time. Domestic violence cases that involve a firearm were 70.9% more likely to result in multiple victim death than non-domestic violence homicides involving a firearm. And we know that. I mean, Giffords has the data on that as well. When a mass shooting starts and it's domestic violence, it starts domestic violence, that person ends up killing either their relative, someone in the home, their girlfriend, their spouse, and then they go on to commit a mass atrocity. So really this intersection is not, this is not new. I just really wanted to bring it to the forefront. So what I'm here to really talk about, and again, I really appreciate the League of Women Voters' support on Karina's bill. Karina Gonzalez and her daughter Daniela Alvarez were shot and killed by their husband and father last summer. And we've been working with her surviving son, Manny, who was also shot in the incident. But really, you know, the network and domestic violence providers, we've known about the intersection of domestic violence and firearms. And when this case came about, it again was a really high profile case, but it was something that really shook the community because she was someone who did what she could to leave the situation. She went and sought an order of protection. She called law enforcement, and her and her daughter still ended up dead. So we renamed and have been working with her son to work on this piece of legislation. We've renamed the bill in her honor. This bill is something that we've been working on before, you know, her tragedy, but we've renamed it in her honor. This bill isn't just for Karina Gonzalez and her daughter. It is for all of the domestic violence victims who have been victims due to firearms. So what is the bill really trying to address? What are the issues in our current system? Right now, the Illinois Domestic Violence Act, which is the law that allows for orders of protection to be granted to survivors in court, is really ambiguous as to when judges can grant the removal of a firearm as part of the order of protection. So right now, it's really resulting in inconsistent approval of request of firearms being removed. So what might happen is, you know, and if you're standing in front of one judge, they might interpret this part of the law to say, yes, in an emergency order of protection, I've made findings, we're going to order that the guns be removed. If you're standing in front of another judge in another county, they might interpret it differently and say, actually, I can't order the removal of firearms in the emergency. You're going to have to wait till the person has received notice, till they've showed up to court, and then we can order the removal of firearms. Which obviously, as I said earlier, is ridiculous when you're standing in open court fearing for your life and there is an actual credible and legit threat of a firearm. Because again, we know that if there's any time for a homicide to occur, it is when you are leaving or when you have left. Firearm relief currently is supposed to be part of an order of protection. So in the form in an order of protection, that is currently an option. But again, because of this ambiguous language that we have in the Illinois Domestic Violence Act, it's not consistently granted or applied. And there's also a loophole in existing law that allows individuals to transfer their firearms when there's been an order of protection granted against them. So let's say, for example, I request an order of protection against my partner. He goes and transfers his guns to his brother that he's staying with, who has a valid FOID card. There's still firearms in the home. That individual still has access to those firearms and can use them. So really, we're trying to make sure that when a judge grants this in an order of protection, that individual can't just transfer their guns to someone else that has a valid FOID card. And again, I want to reiterate, 45% of suspended FOID cards in Illinois were unaccounted for in 2022, and that actually is an increase from 2021, which is crazy to think. So Senate Bill 2633 / House Bill 4469. I know I'm in a room full of veterans of legislation, and I don't need to tell you it's been filed in both chambers, but that's why we have both bill numbers up there. We are focusing on the Senate version right now. So we are focusing on Senate Bill 2633. But really what the bill is intended to do is it's intended to make sure that when a survivor goes to our legal court system for an order of protection, that protection needs to work and firearms need to be a part of that. So it clarifies that a judge can grant the removal or surrender of firearms at the emergency order of protection stage. So again, it starts with the survivor requesting this. This is not in every single order of protection. It also bars the transfer of firearms when this order has been granted. So not again, it doesn't bar the transfer of firearms in every order of protection. It's only when the judge grants the firearm as part of the order of protection. And it ensures that law enforcement have what they need to either request the surrender or execute a search as part of the order of protection. So really, the intention is when you get an order of protection, if the judge has granted firearms relief as part of the order, either that law enforcement officer also has a search warrant with them, or they've been ordered to request the surrender of that firearm when they're serving that order of protection. And the final thing it does is it adds intimate partners to the list of petitioners for firearm restraining orders. So I'm sure you all were really involved when that passed. It's commonly referred to as our red flag laws in Illinois, but firearm restraining orders currently do not include intimate partners, so current dating or ex-dating partners. And we're adding that definition just so that there's another avenue for firearms relief if someone doesn't need an order of protection. I think that, sometimes intimate partners are even more qualified or know exactly what's happening with that person. And if there's a need for firearms, we want to make sure that we want to make sure that they're included in the list of petitioners. I would encourage everyone to sign up for our action alerts as we kind of jump into our spring legislative session. This is our QR code. We do send action alerts for things outside of Karina's bill, but we really focus our legislation on things that are survivor-centered. Firearms and domestic violence are just one intersection, but when an individual is really looking to leave or has left a violent situation or harmful situation, we support any legislation that is survivor-centered and really strengthens the safety net for those seeking to leave. So if it is of interest to you, I would encourage you to sign up. And here's my contact information as well as our social media handles, our website. And I just want to thank you all again so much for your time, your energy, and for your support of Karina's bill.
Thank you, Maralea. So as Karina's bill moves through the legislature down in Springfield, as it gets to committees, we will be sending out requests to file witness slips. I'm sure you are all familiar with that. The way that I can notify you that we need to do a witness slip is you need to be on the gun violence Google group. So if you're not already on that, please look into signing up for that. A lot of these times, these witness slips get us less than 24 hours to respond. So I need you on that list. If we can get all of the Illinois leagues, this incredible group that we can show what we want done down in Springfield. So Sara has been one of my mentors for years in gun violence. I got to know her when she was starting the Moms Demand group up in Vernon Hills. So Sara, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you all for choosing to join us today. I've been a professional organizer focusing on gun violence prevention and criminal justice reform since 2017. And what I know more than anything is we need people engaged and involved. Grassroots energy is what's going to change the culture around guns in this country. And it's what ultimately will lead to the legislative and non-legislative policy change that we want to see. So simply choosing to be here and spending your Saturday afternoon with us, either in person or for those of you that are online, I'm grateful to you. And I'm also grateful to my friend, Jim McGrath. And I want to make sure you all know how lucky you are to have Jim heading up the Gun Violence Prevention Committee for Legal Women Voters. It's no accident that I'm sitting here next to Maralea and Negron. And it's because Jim designed the panel to be that way. And the reason he did that, and he put a great deal of thought into what he was doing, is because what Maralea just shared with you is the perfect sort of segue into what I want to share, which is one of the major lessons that I've learned in these last 8 years almost of focusing on this issue exclusively, other than what I spend my personal time on. I've been doing this full time for all this time. What I've learned is that if we want to end gun violence, then we must do more than just address the acute problem. We must address the underlying root causes. And domestic and intimate partner violence is one of the primary root causes of gun violence. I don't care if it's a high-profile mass shooting that the entire country knows about within an hour, or if it's the kind of shooting that happens, in my small hometown behind closed doors because of an intimate partner conflict. I don't care what it is. There are multiple reasons that led to that shooting. There are multiple reasons that the person who pulled the trigger was feeling in such despair. And until we address the underlying causes, we'll just keep going in circles, and we're not going to see an end to this. So again, thank you. My big message for you today is everything is connected. Right? Domestic violence is not, intimate partner violence is not a problem that's somehow separate from gun violence, as Maralea just very eloquently explained to us and demonstrated to us with Karina's bill and everything else that she shared with us. We do not have many different gun violence problems. We have one very complicated intersectional gun violence epidemic. And until we start applying intersectional solutions to that intersectional problem, then we're just putting a Band-Aid on the problem. So I'll start, just really run you through my opening slide here. I've got the League of Women Voters logo because it's great. Those primary colors make me feel so proud and patriotic. And I have also included logos of some of the other organizations that I am involved with. So Lake County, Illinois is connected administratively and to the Lake County State's Attorney's Office. And Safe Illinois and Honor with Action Illinois are two organizations that I've started. Safe Illinois just within the last couple of months. Honor with Action Illinois it's been in operation for over 2 years now. So I'm going to be mentioning all of these organizations as we go through the slides, and I guess I will go ahead and advance it because I just remembered I have the power to do that. Okay, so what I've broken what I'd like to share with you up into sort of two major buckets, and then the second one, I've broken it down even further. So first, I'm going to very briefly share some really key ideas about how we got here. How did we end up with the worst gun violence epidemic in the modern world and among all developed nations? As I'm sure you all know, we experience gun violence at a rate 25 times higher than all other highly developed countries. The second part of my discussion is going to be about what it will take to end gun violence, which I hinted at a moment ago. It's going to take focusing on root causes. And then I'm going to use 3 examples of how we can focus on root causes. I'm going to start by giving you the example of Chicago's Communities Partnering for Peace, which was the first effort in Illinois to really collaborate with community violence interruption programs in one area, in this case, Cook County. That started around 2015, 2016, and it served as the inspiration for the Lake County Gun Violence Prevention Initiative. But we took that idea that works so well in Cook County, and we built on it and tweaked it for Lake County, which is very different than Cook County because we're a collar county, we're rural, urban, and suburban, rather than fully urban. We don't have a mayor's office of Lake County, so there's a lot of issues that I'll get into in a minute about why the Chicago's Community Partnering for Peace model was our inspiration, but we then needed to tweak it, like I said, for Lake County's needs. And what I would love more than anything is if those of you from other parts of the state, other than Cook County and Lake County, I'd love to hear from you after today if you would like to see a gun violence prevention initiative or something like it in your counties. And then finally, I will share with you why Safe Illinois is necessary, why my partner Chelsea Laliberte and I started it. It's because of our deep conviction that if we're going to end all types of violence, gun violence is simply the most immediately lethal most of the time. But if we're going to end all types of violence, then we have to advocate to strengthen individuals, families, and communities, and that means focusing on root causes. These are my credentials. I won't go into details about them, but I'll just give you a quick rundown of how I got here. So as Jim mentioned, in 2015, I founded the first Moms Demand Action Group in the northern suburbs of Illinois. In 2017, I left behind a 17-year teaching career to become a full-time gun violence prevention advocate because I was so inspired by what I had seen in those first couple of years as a grassroots volunteer advocate. From 2020 to, so in 2017, I became organizer of the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition, and that's where I met Jim and Rosemary Heileman and lots of other great folks that I see in the room. In that position, I worked to help advance gun safety legislation here in Illinois, including gun dealer licensing, the firearm restraining order, the 7-day waiting period, and more. In 2020, I became director of community engagement for Newtown Action Alliance, and I did the same thing, but focused at the federal level. Beginning in 2022, I became chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative in the Lake County State's Attorney's Office, which you'll hear much more about. I was elected to the Lake County Board in November of last year. And this past fall, I and Chelsea LaLiberte, who is one of the premier advocate leaders in Illinois on the issue of harm reduction and recovery, she and I founded Safe Illinois this fall. So how is it all connected? How did we get here? We got here because of the gun lobby, okay? Because of the gun lobby and the fact that those of us that care deeply about creating safe spaces and communities for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, our neighbors, we were looking the other way for decades, while the gun lobby got way out ahead of us. I could spend a whole afternoon explaining to you the history of that sad story, but I'd like you to pull out with me to like a broader view for a moment. And I want you to think about one question as we continue through the slides. Karina's bill, which Maralea just told you about. It's basically about if someone is so dangerous that a judge is granting an order of protection to protect that person's family members or intimate partners, why wouldn't we already have a law in place requiring that their firearms be confiscated? Okay. So be thinking about that. Why are we having to advocate now for Karina's bill? We're Illinois. We have some of the best gun laws in the nation. Why? Why isn't that already a possibility? Okay. So we're going to come back to that question, and hopefully somebody in the crowd will be willing to share an answer that they think might be an answer to that question. But let's help each other get to a point where if you can't answer that question right now, let's help each other get to a point where maybe we can. So all types of gun violence are connected. As I said before, we do not have many different types of gun violence problems. We do not have a mass shooting problem that's somehow different from gun violence in underserved communities problem that's somehow different from suicide, firearm suicide that's somehow different from domestic violence and intimate partner violence conducted with a gun. They're all connected. And you can start by in the top right there, when gun violence, I want you to start here because in America, everything starts with the difference between being marginalized or being of privilege. When gun violence is high in Black and Brown communities, due to decades of systemic racism. So the reason these communities are weak is because we did it on purpose, right? As a society, we agreed that we were going to put systems and procedures and policies in place that made it impossible for a lot of these communities to be strong. And that was a big boon for the gun lobby because nothing sells guns like fear, nothing. The firearm industry, if you go on with me through the cycle, the firearms industry, the gun lobby, and I would like to pause here and be as clear as I can possibly be. I am talking about the gun lobby, the gun industry, the firearms industry and ammunitions industry, and the lobby that supports it. I am not talking about gun owners. The fact is the vast majority of gun owners in America don't want to see gun violence any more than I do or any more than you do. That is a fact. And if anybody tries to say different, please push back. Our opponent on this issue is not responsible gun owners. Our opponent is the gun lobby, because they have used for decades racism and fear in order to sell guns everywhere in America. So they literally want gun violence to be high, because then they sell more guns and they have higher profits. I'll give you an example. There's a federal bill that Congressman Brad Schneider, my congressman, and Senator Durbin have repeatedly introduced in Congress. And it would require gun dealers all across the country to lock up their inventory outside of regular business hours. Every gun lobby organization, primarily the National Rifle Association, but also even to an even greater degree, the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Please write that down, NSSF, the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Those two organizations in particular do everything in their power to kill that bill's chances of moving in Congress, because they do not want gun dealers to have to be forced to lock up their guns. Because if they're not locked up after hours, after business hours, they're more likely to be stolen. Not gun owners, but the gun lobby want those stolen guns to end up on the streets of Black and brown communities. Because when Black and brown communities experience high rates of daily gun violence, your neighbors, if you live in a privileged community, they see the articles every morning in the Tribune or the Sun-Times, and then they think, gosh, maybe to keep my family safe, I better go buy a gun. Or maybe I should buy 20, okay? That's how we got here, because it's all connected. So now, today, what we have, after decades of allowing the gun lobby to pursue fear, to use fear and racism and gin up fear of the other, and then and allowing them to stop every effort to put any sort of regulation in place to prevent someone like the Highland Park shooter from getting a gun. What we have today is high rates of gun violence everywhere. So make no mistake about it. The Gun Violence Prevention Initiative and Safe Illinois, it exists because July 4th, the shooting in Highland Park, it happened because we have failed to prioritize ending the gun violence that happens every day in Waukegan, and on the south and west side of Chicago, and in so many other communities across the country. If you want your child to be safe at their school in Libertyville, then you have to care about whether or not a child is safe on the streets of Waukegan. So now I'd like to move to the second part of what I wanted to share with you, which is, sorry, I gotta go back. How did I phrase it? Where it all started, and then we'll move on to the local focus. So where it started, in Illinois anyway, was with Communities Partnering for Peace, which was founded in 2017. And this was a collection of several gun violence prevention organizations. These are community violence intervention organizations. They're sometimes referred to as street outreach, or the term we used years ago for it was ceasefire. So beginning in 2017, several private funders, really big ones, Joyce Foundation, MacArthur, smaller, medium-sized ones, smaller philanthropic organizations, gave tens of millions of dollars to a handful of community violence interruption programs on the south and west side of Chicago, and said, we don't want you to have to fight for funding with each other anymore. Okay, we're going to give these tens of millions of dollars to Metropolitan Family Services, which created Communities Partnering for Peace, and they served as sort of the funnel through which the funding could go. And then the leaders of these community violence interruption programs made decisions about how to spend the money, so that it eliminated the fighting that had been taking place for decades between these organizations for funding. And the other thing that this tens of millions of dollars in philanthropic funds went to was funding research that started at the same time that this new model of community violence interruption started. And that research is primarily being done through Northwestern University's Institute for Policy Research under the leadership of Andrew Papachristos, and also the University of Chicago Crime Lab. Philanthropic funds were used and were given to those two research institutions so that they could do research step by step from day one to prove that this community violence interruption model works to reduce violence. And that was 2017. We are now reaching the point, and that's what this article that I've included on the slide is about, is it's sort of giving us an overall view of what the research has found. The reason that research was so important and the fact that these philanthropic dollars were used not only to create collaboration and strengthen the community violence interruption programs in Cook County, but they were also used to get the evidence that proves that this model for violence prevention works. That was crucial because without it, we never would have gotten to where we are today, which is a point where we can get public funds, state and federal funds now are available for community violence interruption. That wouldn't have been possible without the research from Andrew Papachristos and the University of Chicago Crime Lab. So that brings me to my tenure with Newtown Action Alliance from 2020 to 2022. One of my roles when I was working for Newtown Action Alliance was to coordinate our involvement with the Invest in Us coalition. Beginning in 2020, the Community Justice Action Fund, which led the Invest in Us coalition, it's the only all Black-led community violence interruption advocacy organization in America. They led all of us other members, such as Live Free, March for Our Lives, Newtown Action Alliance, and many others in the Invest in Us coalition. After the murder of George Floyd, and keep in mind, we had the research from people from Northwestern University of Chicago proving that this type of model would work. After the murder of George Floyd, the Invest in Us coalition came together at the federal level and began to act on our conviction that in order to end gun violence everywhere, we must prioritize ending it in underserved communities. That means we cannot rely forever on philanthropic funds. We need public funds. And so we lobbied to get those public funds in the COVID relief bills, which would not have happened if President Joe Biden had not been elected in 2022. So remember, it's all connected. So this means we must focus on using both philanthropic funds and public funds to rebuild broken individuals, families, and communities by addressing the many root causes of gun violence. By 2023, the Invest in Coalition and Us coalition had succeeded in getting federal funding for holistic approaches to violence prevention, which is what we saw come out of Communities Partnering for Peace. I'm not going to read through the coalition goals for Invest in Us because I'm concerned about time, but I hope you'll be able to see the slides and you can read through them on your own. But it's basically a restating of what I've shared with you today. If we're going to end gun violence everywhere, we have to prioritize strengthening our underserved communities and addressing gun violence that happens every day there. And that is exactly what we set out to do, State's Attorney Eric Reinhardt and I in Lake County. In June of 2022, 29 days before the shooting in Highland Park, we launched the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative. I began advocating for this 5 years before that. I went to the previous state's attorney in Lake County and I asked him for an Office of Violence Prevention, similar to Communities Partnering for Peace, but unlike in any other area of the country, I wanted this Office of Violence Prevention in my prosecutor's office. Because what I have learned along the way, as I've already shared, is if we're going to end gun violence, we have to address its root causes. In addition to domestic violence, another primary root cause of gun violence is inequities in our criminal justice system. So I'll start there with why I wanted it in a prosecutor's office, but I'll go into a little more detail in a few minutes. Oops. Yeah, okay. I'll try to go a little faster. Those of you who know me know I sure can talk. So it's just so much to say. So anyway, just to tie it back to the Invest in Us coalition, the funding in order to begin the Office of Violence Prevention in the Lake County State's Attorney's Office came from those federal dollars, okay, the initial funding. So again, it's all connected. The current Lake County State's Attorney is Eric Reinhardt. And if you don't know much about him, I encourage you to look him up and try to learn a bit about him. The thing I want you to know right now, though, is he is a career defense attorney. He had served as defense attorney for 20 years before being elected state's attorney of Lake County, and that matters. Of all of the state's attorneys and prosecutors in America, think about how many people that is. 50 are career defense attorneys. All of the rest are career prosecutors. And if you're an attorney or have any experience with the legal field, I can see some of you nodding your head. What that means is prosecutors, if they're career prosecutors, tend to think my job begins after the crime has been committed. But career defense attorneys, and Eric Reinhardt is the best example I can think of, their mindset is my job begins before the crime is committed. So the previous state's attorney that I took this idea to, career prosecutor, really great guy, but he was not interested because in his mind, his job is not about preventing violence. It's about reacting after the violence happens. If we want to end this, every single one of us needs to shift that mindset, not just the 7,000 career prosecutors in state's attorney's offices, but all of us. Our mindset should be preventing the crime before it happens, not looking for initiatives that rely on deterrence in order to prevent violence because we've punished people. We know that doesn't work. So we used State's Attorney Eric Reinhardt and I used all of these ideas that I've been sharing with you in order to create the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative. And I'm just gonna go super fast. We wanted it in a state's attorney's office, like I said, because by having it there, we can integrate efforts to address the acute problem of everyday gun violence in our underserved communities with creating criminal justice reform opportunities. That's going to be alternatives to arrest and incarceration for non-violent offenses. There are many other reasons why, if you live anywhere in Illinois other than Cook County and you would like to see an Office of Violence Prevention in your community, you might want to look at Lake County as a model. We have 52 municipalities in Lake County. We do not have a mayor of Lake County. Somebody has to have a central administrative authority in order to run a program that will benefit the entire county. We have 4 countywide offices. Can't be in the clerk's office. That doesn't make sense. Can't be in the circuit clerk's office. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense to put it in the treasurer's office. We might make sense to put it in the sheriff's office, except there's very little trust between underserved communities and law enforcement. So if you put it in a state's attorney's office, you've got that administrative oversight over the entire county. So you can make it, it's a lot easier to really serve the entire county. Also, community violence interruption only works in collaboration with law enforcement. Cook County has one law enforcement agency, the Chicago Police Department. We have 48 different law enforcement agencies. So we have to have some entity that can connect with all of them. So how are we doing it? How are we using the state's attorney's office in order to prevent gun violence in Lake County? Through the use of grant funding at both federal, state, and county funding, we are utilizing, we are taking some of that county money, not all of it, some of that public funds, not all of it, and we're giving it to the Lake County Peacemakers. This is our community violence interruption program in Lake County, but that money has to go through a fiscal agent. In our case, it's Waukegan Township, because the Lake County Peacemakers are community violence intervention specialists. They cannot share information with the state's attorney's office. So the state's attorneys in our office, we share information with them. If we know that somebody has been arrested for illegal possession of a firearm, but has not committed a violent act, but we know they've been arrested, we make sure those community violence outreach workers are able to connect with that person and help them learn to solve their problems peacefully. So the information only goes one way. We also we're building that Lake County Peacemaker organization through the leadership of Marcus McAllister and Dr. Chico Tillman, who are doing the training and the hiring, and they are internationally renowned as experts in creating these types of programs. So I'm not going to go through the next slides in detail, but as you can see, we received $2.25 million so far from the federal government, almost $1 million from the state government, and the entire project got off the ground when the Lake County Board voted in 2022 to spend nearly a little over $500,000 of American Rescue Plan funds to give us the initial funding in order to start the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative. I'm not going to go through that because I'm concerned about time, but I do want to point out this is a bit of a picture of gun violence in Lake County, and I'd just like to draw your attention to the numbers on the right. First of all, North Chicago, Waukegan, and Zion, those red dots are where the violence has happened over this 3-year period. And as you can see, most of it is clustered in those 3 communities. But what I'd like you to notice is the percent change in gun violence in each of those communities since we began using public funds in order to invest in these types of violence prevention programs. North Chicago saw a 60% decrease, Waukegan a 9% decrease, Zion 30, I can't read it from here, 37% decrease. On average, Lake County has seen a 41% decrease in gun violence from 2020 to 2023. And I'd also like to draw your attention to firearm homicides. It's broken down a little bit differently here, but it's the same information with similar outcome. In terms of firearm homicides, they're down 47% in 2023 as compared to 2022. And I would like to make sure everyone realizes that does not include the Highland Park July 4th shooting. So that decrease is a direct result of the community violence interruption work that's being done in these 3 communities that are most heavily, who experience the highest levels of gun violence. Again, concerned about time, so I'm going to just kind of share with you our mission to implement trauma-informed programs and foster collaborative efforts throughout Lake County that will reduce and prevent all types of gun violence by addressing its root causes. We're doing that through targeted violence interruption through the Community Violence Interruption Lake County Peacemakers. We're using restorative justice practices that work to prevent unnecessary incarceration and criminal convictions for non-violent offenses, and that is the key word. Alternatives to arrest and incarceration in Lake County are only for non-violent offenses. We're developing and supporting a countywide network of partners that can provide services to the people who are the most in risk and at risk of either being a victim or perpetrator of violence. And we are educating and implementing programs to raise awareness about gun violence prevention, firearm safety, and so on. So we've already talked about the root causes of gun violence, so I'm going to skip this slide. I hope you'll get a chance to look at it on your own later. But what you're seeing now is a visual representation of the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative. So the GVPI is, as I said, housed in the state's attorney's office, and it's in the very middle. And you'll notice the little puzzle, we call it the puzzle piece graphic, because the GVPI serves as the warm handoff. If you look on the orange module there in the bottom right, this is where our Lake County peacemakers and other violence interruption professionals in Lake County, if they have someone that they're trying to keep out of a situation where they might get involved in violence, there are a lot of things that that person needs. They might need access to behavioral and mental health care. They might need access to, educational opportunities. Maybe they didn't finish high school. They need to get a GED so they can find a job so that they can not sell drugs. So it goes on. And the GVPI serves as the facilitator for those Lake County peacemakers. I'll give you an example. We had someone who showed up in a hospital in Condell earlier this fall, gunshot wound. His roommate had shot him, and it was the Lake County peacemakers that met him at the hospital. That's part of what they do, to find out what they could do to help this young man and what he needed once he was released from the hospital. And he said, well, I can't go home because the person who shot me lives there. Like, where do I go? I have nowhere to go. And so what happened was the interrupter, Lake County peacemaker, called the director of the GVPI here in the state's attorney's office, explained the situation, and she said, wait, he was shot by his roommate. This sounds like a domestic violence or intimate partner situation. Let me call a Safe Place, which is our premier domestic violence organization in Lake County. Let me call a Safe Place and see if they have some place for him to stay. That would never have happened. That connection between a Safe Place and the Lake County peacemakers would not have happened at all if it hadn't been for the GVPI. And so that's an example of how we're building out this network of community-based organizations and service providers all over Lake County in order to quickly get the people most in risk and at risk of being victims and perpetrators of violence, whatever service they need. And I've talked already quite a bit about the role of community violence intervention. These are Lake County peacemakers in Lake County and Cook County. Those are going to be the communities partnering for peace organizations. What they do is the Lake County peacemakers, they go and find the people who are most in risk and at risk. Sometimes they're able to find them because they've been given helpful information from the state's attorney's office. And then they go find that person and they begin building relationships with these high-risk individuals. They then take an intake process where they talk about what needs that person has. And then they develop a risk reduction plan for each participant. They mediate any sort of conflicts that that person may be involved in. And then they give warm handoffs like the one I just described with a safe place in order to get the services that we have in Lake County to the people who need them most. These are some quotes from some of our Lake County peacemakers. You can see they are, I think, 12 members strong and growing, because so far every public dollar that we've applied for gun violence prevention initiative in Lake County, we've received. We're batting 1,000. And the more we can keep getting that type of funding, the more Lake County peacemakers we can hire. The future priorities for Lake County's Office of Violence Prevention are piloting data sharing agreements with law enforcement and other community leaders, so we can find out where the violence is most likely to happen before it happens. We're going to continue expanding youth outreach in schools. We're educating the community about safe firearm storage and extreme risk. Earlier this fall, the Lake County Board voted to create a permanent position within the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative, and that person's job is to focus completely on firearm safety all over the county, not just in Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion. That person will do things like educate people about the firearm restraining order, safe firearm storage, and so on. We're also continuing to build relationships with stakeholders to build out that puzzle piece graphic, and we are publishing a countywide violence reduction plan, and we're expecting that to come out within the next week or two. We're also developing interactive resource mapping tools, and we need to diversify our funding opportunities. So I'm wrapping up now, believe it or not. So Safe Illinois, as I said, is a new kind of advocacy organization, and it's focused at the state level, but it's focused not only on changing laws like Karina's bill, but it's also focused on non-legislative policy change, like getting states' attorneys' offices in other parts of the state to open offices of violence prevention. But just let's switch to the legislative policy change for a moment. Some of the changes we need in addition to the assault weapons ban, because even though we have an assault weapons ban in Illinois, the bad news, that's the good news. The bad news is it won't end gun violence. So we need much more, including Karina's bill. So I'm going to go through the rest of the slides because I've talked way too long, but I hope you'll have a chance to read them somewhere else so you can get a sense of how Safe Illinois is supporting the passage of Karina's bill. Our entire gun violence prevention legislative platform is on this slide. You'll notice our top priority is Karina's bill. Safe gun storage does not have an actual bill number yet, but we hope it will soon. And then next is the Homicide Victims Families Rights Act. So on the gun violence prevention side, that's what Safe Illinois is focused on right now. Maralea already told you about Karina's bill, so I won't. And this is information about the Safe Storage Bill and Homicide Victims Families Rights Act. And so with that, I'm sorry I went over. I promised Jim I wouldn't, but Jim has been by my side for so long that I think he'll forgive me.
Thank you, Sarah. As you can see, she is a wealth of knowledge. I love working with her. You've got two of the icons in the gun violence prevention world sitting on stage here. First question, and I think this comes, Maralea, one of the comments that you made in your presentation was, what are FOID cards that are unaccounted for? What does that mean?
Yeah, sure.
First, define what a FOID card is.
Yeah, absolutely. So a FOID card is a fire owner's identification card. And so they go through an application process with Illinois State Police to be able to legally obtain firearms. As many of you know, I'm sure we don't have a firearm registry in Illinois, but I'll let Sarah, who's the actual expert on firearms, speak to that if she'd like. But there are an array of reasons why someone's FOID card could be suspended and or revoked. One of them is orders of protection. So in all orders of protection in Illinois, if someone gets an order of protection against you and you have a FOID card, automatically that person's FOID card is suspended for the length of the order. So what's happening is, you know, again, my intersection is domestic violence and firearms in this setting, but The figure I showed about 45% of FOID cards being suspended and being unaccounted for is really because when your FOID card is suspended or revoked, you're supposed to be filling out what's called a disposition record with Illinois State Police. And you're supposed to be saying, you know, I've got X amount of guns and I'm now transferring ownership over to, you know, so-and-so who is a valid FOID card holder. And that's how they're accounting for their firearms as a responsible gun owner. And we're just seeing that folks are not completing those disposition records. They're not giving account of where their firearms are and who has them once their FOID card has been suspended or revoked.
As you saw earlier today, that money is the root of all of these issues. Everybody needs money to make their programs work. One of the issues with turning in FOID cards is local police departments don't have the resources to go after the people who have not turned in their weapons. So that's an issue. Question for Marley, again, this is on Karina's bill. HB 4461, it's a question. Was that passed in the spring of 2023? And is it now in the Senate?
So there was an earlier version of Karina's bill. It was included in an omnibus firearms package, which was HB 676. That was passed in the spring of last year. And it ultimately went to the Senate and died. There were pieces of that bill that came out because it was a firearms package that were passed, like the first-time weapon offenders provisions. But the provisions in Karina's bill were not passed. And so that's why we've refiled Karina's bill. We're focusing on the Senate and making sure that, you know, leadership in the Senate is on board with the bill and trying to get as many co-sponsors as possible. So again, that bill number is Senate Bill 2633. And the bill language has changed. So there have been some modifications to you know, negotiations that we've had with law enforcement. And really the bill is modeled after the Firearm Restraining Orders Act. So just bear that in mind as well. But great question.
Thank you, Marlene. This is, I guess, another question for Maralea. Do judges have access to a database to know that a perpetrator has a firearm?
So judges, to my understanding, do not have a database. The way in which judges are informed is if their information is run in leads, which is what law enforcement have access to. And that's how they're able to see kind of what, if anything, that person should not have in their possession. So judges won't know until that survivor that's going in front of them is saying there's a firearm. And ISP, Illinois State Police, is then notified when that emergency order protection is entered, that FOID card has to be revoked. And that again is through lead system.
Another question is that supposedly Karina's bill did not pass due to the fact that law enforcement is so difficult.
Yes, unfortunately, in part that is the case. I will say to what Sarah was saying earlier, Lake County State's Attorney Eric Reinhart has come out in strong support of the bill, which we're really appreciative of. The Cook County Sheriff's Office has also come out in strong support, which is the first law enforcement agency to come out in support of the bill. But the Illinois Sheriff's Association continues to have concerns. So we're talking through those concerns. We're also talking to chiefs of police and local law enforcement to make sure, to the extent possible, we're able to address any of their concerns in the bill. But that is our biggest uphill battle.
Let me see. All these are from Maralea. And this is, I'm not sure how this question, but I will just read it. It says, why? Because the right to own a gun supersedes the right to be safe from the gun owner.
What's their
That's
question?
That's what we're faced with all the time. I think the question is, and I'm just going to keep reading this, because the right to own a gun supersedes the right to be safe.
I mean, if you're asking for my personal opinion, I'd say absolutely that's what we're dealing with right now. I think the concerns that we've had in, you know, negotiations and talking to stakeholders is the fact that folks are concerned that, you know, folks are going to run to go the court. And I'm sure that you all heard this with the emergency with the fro is, folks are going to run to the court and try to get, a lawful gun owner's rights taken away. And that's just not right. They've got Second Amendments and they have a right to bear arms. But we know that that's just not the case. And we know that when a survivor stands in open court in front of a judge and is being vulnerable and sharing some of the scariest, most intimate accounts of what they've experienced in terms of abuse, they should be believed. And when they say that a firearm has been part of that abuse and that there is extreme threat to themselves or to their children, they again should be believed, because it takes a lot to do that. And I would encourage anyone who thinks that obtaining an order of protection, especially with the firearm, is easy, to observe open court and to go watch, judges and individuals who go and have to make their case in front of a room full of people and in front of attorneys, because it is very intimidating.
Thank you. I think the last question is, does the network work with the gender-based violence, deal with trans people?
Yes, absolutely. Our real framework for what we do is dealing with the root causes and marginalized communities that deal with this issue of gender-based violence, which is why we kind of default to that term usually. We know that gender-based violence is higher amongst LGBTQ communities, amongst communities of color. And so we really focus our work on that. Some of our membership providers do focus specifically on that intersection of providing GBV services to the LGBTQ community.
I lied. One more question. How do we get counties throughout Illinois to cooperate with the order of protection? Downstate counties will not serve order of protection from another county.
Yeah, this is something that is actually coming up in negotiations with the bill right now. So, the venue question of where and when you can obtain an order of protection is a big deal. So in the Illinois Domestic Violence Act, you're able to request an order of protection in multiple venues. So it can be where you live, where the respondent lives, or where the abuse has occurred. And so we're talking about, in this intersection of firearms and orders of protection, what does happen. And because we've modeled this after the firearm restraining order, it's been our understanding in talking to gun violence prevention groups that this hasn't come up a whole lot, of how you serve an order of protection or a firearm restraining order in another county, because usually they're filed in the same county. So that piece is currently something that we're really looking into. And if we can address it legislatively, we will in the bill. But orders of protection being granted in downstate counties is a big issue. And something that we always go on and on about is education for judges. That is not something that we can legislate because of the issue of separation of powers. So we cannot pass a bill in the General Assembly to say we're mandating, gender-based violence training for judges, so that if they're dealing with an order of protection, they understand the power and control dynamics. They understand what gender-based violence is. They understand how it impacts marginalized communities more than it does, privileged communities. It's not something we can legislate. So it's something that I think we would love to see. And we've been trying to talk to the administrative office of the Illinois courts to see if that's something that they're interested in doing, because it really isn't something we can legislate. It's something that we kind of have to push through systems advocacy to get our judges to be informed on this issue.
And that's why, thank you. I just want to say that's why it's so important to have advocacy organizations like Safe Illinois that aren't exclusively focused on legislative policy change, because we also need an awful lot of non-legislative policy change that Maralea just described. So keep that in mind and ask yourself, the advocacy organizations that you are involved with, are they only focused on bills, which is great, we need that, right? But we need to also be supporting organizations that are focused on non-legislative policy change.
You hand me the clicker.
Oh.
So there was a question, what is the Corinna's bill number? There are two. We're going to start with the Senate this year. So the first bill is SB 2633. The Senate, for some reason, is the hard, as Maralea indicated, it died in the Senate last year. So what we want to do is focus on your senators, SB 2633. So these are just some more highlights from Maralea's presentation. Our position, these are our position statements that we have now. So you can see we're advocating for our position that we already have. It's important that we do this. We shouldn't have a problem in the House because it passed before in the House. And as Maralea indicated, we're updating in this bill some of the issues with the FRO, the Firearms Restraining Order, which passed a couple of years ago, already had one update. And when we pass the bill into law and we try to implement it, we find there are issues that we missed. So we're trying to do one more update on that. It is a key sponsors, our coalition partners. There we go. And that's some, so as Maralea indicated too, there's literature on the table as you leave tonight. On the table on your right, as you exit the door, there's she's got literature there for you. Ethan's Law. I don't know if you've heard about Ethan's Law, but Sara referred to it. Ethan was a 15-year-old high school boy. He just got his braces taken off in the morning. His mother said, "Let's go have lunch and celebrate." He said, "Mom, I want to go see my friend." That's the last his mother ever saw him alive. He went and saw his friend. His friend had been showing off his dad's firearms. Ethan picked it up and killed himself accidentally. So we are advocating for safe gun storage, not just with a lock, but in a secure box, not something that's left in a locked car, but in a secure box. What we really want to do is try to require biometric or boxes that have a safe. If you have a cell phone, every time you pick your cell phone up, you have to dial in probably a code to open it up. Opening those boxes where the guns are secured takes no longer than it takes for you to open your cell phone. So don't accept from a gun person that it takes too long to open my box. It doesn't. It's the same as, use that example for your cell phone. Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much for bringing up Ethan's Law, Jim, and thank you to the League for wanting to support it. So Kristen Song is Ethan's mom, and when I was working for Newtown Action Alliance, I had the great honor of working with her and visiting hundreds and hundreds of congressional staffers asking for support for Ethan's Law. I was so inspired by that experience that when I was elected to the Lake County Board last spring, I had been on the board for a few months at that point. I was reflecting on how wonderful it is that Illinois has passed an assault weapons ban as of January of 2023. And that is a wonderful thing. But as I said earlier, it will not end gun violence. And what everyone needs to understand is that only a very small percentage of gun violence is committed with a military style assault rifle. What will really make a big impact on reducing all types of gun violence, not just mass shootings at parades, is a safe storage law. And I knew from my experience working with Kristen and her success in getting support for this bill in Congress, although it's not yet passed, but getting support for this bill in Congress and in others, getting it passed entirely in other states, I knew that we could do it in Illinois, and it's ridiculous that we haven't already, right, passed a firearm safety bill. So last spring, I put forward a resolution before the Lake County Board, and I asked that we pass this resolution urging the Illinois General Assembly to pass the safe storage law. I sit on the Law and Judicial Committee, and when I made that initial request, I expected pushback from my Republican colleagues on the board. I got none instantly. Both Republicans said, of course, yes, we need a safe storage law in Illinois. I support this. Then when it went to the full board, the other 3 Republicans on the Lake County board voted yes with no debate, including the gun dealer. Then we went on to advocate for non-legislative policy change. Advocates across the collar counties and in Cook County pushed their local county boards to pass a resolution urging the Illinois General Assembly to pass a gun safety law, Ethan's Law. And in every single county, Will, Kane, and Cook, all of the Republicans and all of the Democrats voted unanimously in favor of the resolution. Safe storage is not a political issue. Republicans will vote for it. We've proven it over and over again. So when we get the chance to advocate for a safe storage bill in the General Assembly, please do not accept the argument that you will get from some legislators that this bill is too controversial, I'm not going to vote for it. It is not, okay? Safe storage, everyone wants it, except the gun lobby, because they want you to be afraid and go buy more guns.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that. So we'll just, our position statements that we have today support Ethan's Law. What we're doing though in Illinois is we have Ethan's Law, but what we're working on, Sarah and I are on a committee where we're trying to develop a little bit stronger safe storage gun bill. Hasn't been presented yet. So the bill is currently in the Senate, but it may be replaced with a new, stronger bill requiring safe and secure storage in a locked container with penalties. Now, this is one of the issues with safe storage. When a minor gets access to a gun and injures someone, kills someone, the tendency is to prosecute the teenager, not the gun owner. The gun owner is complicit because they didn't lock their gun up. So we have to have a law that says you prosecute the gun owner. That's your first priority. Usually with the kid, it's an accident. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure everyone knows that 3 days ago, I think, if I've got my days of the week right, what day is today? The state of Michigan just convicted the first parent, some of you are nodding your heads, under their safe storage law, which was passed in response to the Oxford High School shooting that took place at the end of 2021. And so if Michigan can do it, we can do it. And everything that Jim just said, I'll just take a moment because I know a lot of that. I saw so many people nodding their heads. That makes me so happy because it tells me the news is getting out there, right? It's getting out to the public at large. There's also been some other high profile situations in the last several months where a parent has been held accountable. Many of you have heard of Jennifer Crumbley, whose son was the shooter at Oxford High School, and she was just convicted of manslaughter. And her husband will face the exact same charges in very similar situations in a couple of weeks. A few months before that, State's Attorney Eric Reinhardt in Lake County became the first person to successfully prosecute a parent for making a very poor decision that led to the death and injury of many people in that community. I bring these 3 things up because we're at a tipping point right now. Okay, I've been doing this for a long time. And when I started 7 years ago, people told me never to mention the word ban, because if I did, no legislator would ever talk to me again. In 2022, we passed the assault weapons ban out of the US House of Representatives. We saw it passed into law in Illinois in 2023. It's happening, okay? I want everybody to walk out of here today knowing one thing. In the fight to end gun violence, we are winning. And I know it often doesn't feel that way, but we are. And the second thing I want you to know is we're winning because of you, and because of Jim, and because of Maralea, and because of all the friends and family and people that you know in your network who keep showing up the way you all have today. So I don't want to minimize the suffering. There will be more news of mass shootings probably before you get home today, okay? But when you feel that despair in your heart, know we are winning. Okay, and keep coming back.
It's a tedious process, and we are in it for the long haul. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and you have to be ready for that. We've had failures. One of the laws that we passed a couple of years ago, I think Don Harmon had it for 10 years.
Are you talking about gun dealer licensing? Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. Don Harmon, before he became Speaker of the Senate, sorry, I misspoke, President of the Senate, he was one of our biggest champions on gun violence prevention. He represents Oak Park and Austin, and that matters because he put forth a bill, geez, I don't know, 2020 is when he started, maybe, gun dealer licensing, which was intended to cut down on the flow of illegally trafficked firearms into underserved communities. And I set you up there, Jim. Do you want to continue with what you were going to say about that?
Well, just what I want to do is we've had some successes, as Sarah, and here's a couple. The Protect Illinois Communities Act, which is the assault weapons ban. Okay, and not many people realize this, but we are the first state to sign a bill, the Firearms Industry Responsibility Act. What that means is you can't advertise a gun directed for children. They came out with, instead of a AR-15, they came out with a JR-15 or a junior 15. They're advertising for kids. So you can't do that in Illinois. I was present when JB signed that bill at the Everytown Conference in Chicago this last summer. There were 1,500 people from states, all 50 states, cheering Illinois. Thank you.